The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Rebecca Stone stumbled down the wooden steps, her small hands clutching a worn leather satchel that contained everything she owned. Copper Ridge looked like every other frontier town, dusty, harsh, and unwelcoming. But for Rebecca, it represented something she'd never had before, a chance to start over. She stood uncertainly by the stage depot, reading and rereading the crumpled letter in her pocket. Position available for school teacher. Room and board provided. References required. She had the references, forged though they were, and she certainly needed the work. What she didn't have was the ability to speak. "You the new teacher?" a stern voice demanded. Rebecca looked up to see a thin woman in black dress approaching, her face pinched with disapproval. This had to be Mrs. Hartwell, the town school board representative. Rebecca nodded and began to sign her response, her hands moving gracefully in the language she'd learned as a child. Mrs. Hartwell's expression turned to horror. "What in heaven's name are you doing with your hands? Are you having some kind of fit?" Rebecca's heart sank. She pulled out the slate she always carried and wrote quickly, "I am deaf mute. I communicate through sign language and writing." "Absolutely not." Mrs. Hartwell snatched the slate away. "We cannot have a teacher who makes those gestures. It's unseemly, possibly evil. The position has been filled." Before Rebecca could respond, Mrs. Hartwell was already walking away, taking Rebecca's slate with her. Standing alone in the dusty street, Rebecca felt the familiar weight of rejection crushing down on her shoulders. Once again, her silence had been mistaken for something shameful. "Ma'am," a gentle voice said behind her. Rebecca turned to see a tall man in work clothes, his withered face kind but cautious. He was probably in his 30s, with brown hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Most importantly, he was holding out her slate, which he must have retrieved from Mrs. Hartwell. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, speaking slowly and clearly so she could read his lips. Rebecca took the slate gratefully and wrote, "Thank you. I am Rebecca Stone." "Cole Matthews," he replied, touching his hat brim. "I saw what happened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell treated you that way." Rebecca wrote again, "It happens often. People fear what they don't understand." Cole studied her message, then looked directly into her eyes. "I run a ranch about 5 miles out of town. Could use help with bookkeeping, correspondence, that sort of thing. Pays fair, and there's a small cabin that comes with the job." Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. After years of rejection and cruelty, here was a stranger offering her both work and kindness. She wrote carefully, "Why would you help me?" Cole was quiet for a moment, and Rebecca saw something like old pain flicker across his features. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be judged for something you can't control." Don't miss how Rebecca's new life unfolds. Subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming Western stories of acceptance and love. The Matthews Ranch was modest but well maintained, with a small main house, a barn, and the promised cabin that would become Rebecca's home. As Cole showed her around, she noticed how he made sure she could see his face when he spoke, how he didn't seem bothered by her silence. The previous owner kept terrible records, Cole explained, leading her to a cluttered desk in his study. Bills, receipts, correspondence. It's all mixed together. I can read and write fine, but organizing, well, that's not my strong suit. Rebecca examined the chaos and felt a familiar excitement. This was work she could do well, work that didn't require speech. She wrote on her slate, "I can have this organized within a week. Take whatever time you need," Cole said. "The cabin's got everything you'll need." Mrs. Garcia from town brings supplies once a week, and she's more understanding than most. That evening, as Rebecca settled into her new home, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. The cabin was small but clean, with a bed, a table, and most importantly, good light for reading and writing. For the first time in years, she felt something approaching hope. Her contentment was shattered the next morning when she saw riders approaching the ranch. Rebecca recognized Mrs. Hartwell immediately, along with two men she didn't know, one wearing a preacher's collar, the other looking like some kind of official. From her cabin window, she watched Cole meet them in the yard. Though she couldn't hear the conversation, she could read the tension in their body language. Mrs. Hartwell was pointing toward Rebecca's cabin, her face twisted with righteous indignation. Rebecca grabbed her slate and hurried outside, arriving just as the preacher was saying, "Unnatural gestures are the devil's work, Brother Matthews. That woman is a danger to this community's moral fiber." Reverend Walsh, Cole replied evenly, "Miss Stone is my employee. Her personal habits are none of your concern." "Those aren't habits," the official, apparently the sheriff, interjected. "I've been asking around about sign language. Some doctor in Denver says it's connected to madness, that people who use it can become violent." Rebecca felt sick. She'd heard such ignorant theories before, but they never stopped hurting. She stepped forward and began to write on her slate, but Mrs. Hartwell knocked it from her hands. "See? She's trying to cast some kind of spell." "Enough." Cole's voice cut through the accusations like a whip. "You're on my property, spreading lies about my employee. I'll thank you to leave." "This isn't over, Matthews," Sheriff Brady warned. "That woman is a public menace. Mark my words, she'll bring nothing but trouble to this town." After the unwelcome visitors left, Cole helped Rebecca retrieve her slate. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't think they'd follow you here." Rebecca wrote, "This always happens. Maybe I should leave before I cause you problems." Cole shook his head firmly. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." The warmth in his voice made Rebecca's heart flutter in a way she didn't expect. She wrote, "Why do you defend me? You barely know me." Cole looked out toward the horizon, his expression distant. "My younger brother was born simple-minded, couldn't speak properly, had trouble understanding things. People in our last town treated him like an animal, said he was cursed. After he died, I swore I'd never stand by and watch people be cruel to someone just because they're different." Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes. She wrote, "I'm sorry about your brother. Danny would have liked you," Cole said with a sad smile. "He was always trying to talk with his hands, making up his own signs. Maybe if I'd known about real sign language then." For the first time since arriving in Copper Ridge, Rebecca felt truly understood. She began to sign, then caught herself and reached for her slate instead. "No," Cole said gently. "Use your hands. I want to learn." Over the following weeks, Cole proved to be a quick student of sign language. Rebecca taught him basic signs during their evening meals, and she was amazed by his patience and genuine interest. Unlike so many people who saw her signing as something strange or frightening, Cole treated it as simply another language worth learning. Like this, he asked one evening, carefully forming the sign for thank you. Rebecca nodded and showed him how to refine the gesture. Then, impulsively, she signed, "You're a good man, Cole Matthews." "What did you just say?" Cole asked, recognizing that it was more complex than their usual practice. Rebecca hesitated, then wrote on her slate, "I said you're kind," but Cole had been watching carefully, and Rebecca could see he knew she'd signed more than that. He was learning to read her expressions as well as her hands, and the thought both thrilled and terrified her. Their peaceful routine was interrupted one morning when Mrs. Garcia, the supply woman, arrived in obvious distress. She spoke rapidly in Spanish to Cole, gesturing toward town with obvious agitation. "What's wrong?" Cole asked in Spanish, which Rebecca was surprised to discover he spoke fluently. "The preacher, Mrs. Garcia replied. He's been giving sermons about the mute woman, saying she's brought a curse on the town. Yesterday, the Wilson baby got sick, and they're blaming her evil magic." Rebecca didn't need to understand Spanish to know they were discussing her. The fear and concern on Mrs. Garcia's face told the whole story. She wrote quickly, "What's happening?" Cole translated, his jaw tight with anger. "Reverend Walsh is spreading lies about you. Some people in town are starting to believe them." "It gets worse, Mrs. Garcia continued in Spanish. "Sheriff Brady is talking about having her examined by a doctor, maybe committed to an asylum. He says her condition could be contagious." Rebecca saw Cole's hands clench into fists. "They can't do that. She hasn't committed any crime." "Since when has that stopped, Brady?" Mrs. Garcia replied bitterly. "That man has his own ideas about justice." That afternoon, Cole decided they needed supplies in town, though Rebecca suspected he really wanted to gauge the situation for himself. She dressed carefully in her most conservative clothes, hoping to avoid drawing attention. The moment they entered Miller's general store, Rebecca felt the hostile stares. Conversations stopped, and people moved away from her as if she might contaminate them. When she reached for an item on a high shelf, a woman actually screamed and pulled her children away. "Devil's magic," the woman shrieked. "She's cursing my babies." The store erupted in chaos. Someone shouted about calling the sheriff, while others demanded that Cole remove that creature from their town. Rebecca stood frozen in the center of the storm, her hands trembling with the effort not to sign her distress. Cole appeared at her side, his presence like a shield against the mob's hatred. "We're leaving," he said quietly, guiding her toward the door. But Sheriff Brady was already there, blocking their exit with 2 deputies. "Not so fast, Matthews. I've got questions for your employee." "She's done nothing wrong," Cole said evenly. "That's yet to be determined." Brady stepped closer to Rebecca, his eyes cold with disgust. I've been reading about people like her. That hand-waving isn't natural. Doctors say it can lead to violent madness. Rebecca wanted to respond to defend herself, but her slate had been left in the wagon. She began to sign without thinking, trying to explain that she meant no harm. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. People screamed, children cried, and someone threw a bottle that shattered against the wall near Rebecca's head. "See," Brady shouted over the noise. "She's casting spells right here in front of us." Cole stepped between Rebecca and the crowd, his hand moving to his gun. "Anyone who wants to hurt her will have to go through me first." "Stand down, Matthews," Brady warned. "Don't make this worse than it has to be." "The only thing making this worse is ignorance and cruelty," Cole replied. "Miss Stone is a good, decent woman who's never harmed anyone." "Then why won't she speak like a normal person?" someone shouted from the crowd. For the first time, Rebecca found her voice. Not the voice she'd lost to childhood illness, but the voice that lived in her hands and heart. She began to sign, slowly and deliberately, telling her story for anyone willing to understand. Cole washed her hands and translated for the crowd. "She says she lost her hearing and speech to fever when she was 5 years old. She says sign language isn't magic. It's just another way to communicate. She says she came here hoping to find acceptance, not hatred." The confrontation in the general store marked a turning point in Copper Ridge. Over the next few days, the town split into two camps: those who believed Reverend Walsh's claims about Rebecca being dangerous, and a smaller group who began to question whether they'd been wrong about her. Dr. Harrison, the town's physician, was among the latter. He arrived at Cole's ranch 3 days after the incident, his medical bag in hand and curiosity in his eyes. "I'd like to examine Miss Stone," he told Cole. "Not for the reasons Brady suggested, but because I'm genuinely interested in her condition. I studied under a doctor in Boston who worked with deaf patients." Rebecca was hesitant at first, but Cole's reassuring presence gave her courage. Dr. Harrison's examination was thorough but respectful, and his questions showed real understanding of her situation. "Remarkable," he said afterward. "Your signing is more sophisticated than anything I've seen. You're clearly intelligent and well-educated. Where did you learn?" Rebecca wrote, "At a school for the deaf in St. Louis. I was there for 8 years." "And they taught you to read lips as well?" Rebecca nodded and wrote, "Some. It helps with people who speak clearly, like you and Cole." Dr. Harrison turned to Cole. "This woman has been given an excellent education despite her disabilities. The idea that sign language is connected to madness or evil is complete nonsense, medical nonsense." "Tell that to the rest of the town," Cole said grimly. "I intend to." Dr. Harrison's voice was firm. "I'll be giving a presentation at the town meeting this Sunday, explaining the real medical facts about deafness and sign language. But not everyone in Copper Ridge was interested in medical facts." That night, Rebecca was awakened by the smell of smoke. Looking out her cabin window, she saw flames licking at Cole's barn. She grabbed her shawl and ran toward the main house, pounding on the door to wake Cole. "Fire," she managed to say aloud, one of the few words she could still speak. Cole was up and moving instantly. Together, they fought the blaze with buckets of water from the well, but it was clear the fire had been deliberately set. Someone had poured coal oil around the barn's foundation and lit it in multiple places. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, Sheriff Brady arrived with his deputies. He surveyed the damage with satisfaction rather than concern. "Looks like someone's trying to send you a message, Matthews," Brady said. "Maybe it's time you reconsidered harboring that woman." "This is arson," Cole replied angrily. "Are you going to investigate or just stand there making threats?" "I'll investigate, all right? But I think we both know who's really responsible for this trouble." Brady's eyes found Rebecca, and she saw the hatred there. He blamed her for the fire, for the town's unrest, for everything wrong in Copper Ridge. In his mind, she was the source of all problems simply by existing. That afternoon, as they cleaned up the damage, Rebecca made a difficult decision. She wrote a long message on her slate and handed it to Cole. "I can't stay here. My presence is putting you in danger. Last night proved that some people will hurt you to get to me. I won't be responsible for that." Cole read the message twice, then shook his head. "You're not leaving. This is your home now." Rebecca wrote again, "They'll keep escalating until someone gets seriously hurt." "Maybe they're right, Maybe I don't belong here. Listen to me, Cole said, taking her hands in his. I've spent too many years alone, Rebecca. You've brought light to this place, to my life. I'm not giving that up because of a few ignorant bullies. Rebecca felt her heart racing at his touch, at the intensity in his voice. She wrote, "Why are you willing to risk so much for me?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her hands. "Because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Your strength, your kindness, the way you see the world despite all the cruelty you've faced. I love you, Rebecca Stone, and I'm not letting anyone drive you away." Rebecca stared at him in wonder. No one had ever said those words to her before. She'd begun to think no one ever would. With trembling hands, she signed her response, then wrote it down so there could be no misunderstanding. "I love you too, Cole Matthews. More than I ever thought possible." When Cole kissed her, gentle and sure, Rebecca felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Love conquers fear, but will it be enough to conquer the town's hatred? Subscribe to see how Rebecca and Cole face their greatest challenge yet. Dr. Harrison's presentation at the town meeting created more division than unity. While some residents were swayed by his medical expertise, others became more entrenched in their prejudices. Reverend Walsh countered the doctor's facts with fire and brimstone rhetoric about unnatural signs and corrupted souls. The situation reached a breaking point when Mrs. Henderson's youngest daughter fell seriously ill with pneumonia. Instead of accepting Dr. Harrison's diagnosis, the distraught mother fixated on the timing. The illness had begun the day after she'd seen Rebecca signing in the street. "That devil woman cursed my baby," Mrs. Henderson wailed at an impromptu town gathering. "She looked right at little Mary and made those evil gestures, and now my child is dying." Sheriff Brady seized the opportunity. "This has gone far enough. I'm issuing a warrant for the arrest of Rebecca Stone on charges of practicing witchcraft and endangering public health." Cole was in town when the warrant was issued, and he raced home to warn Rebecca. But when he arrived at the ranch, he found her cabin empty and signs of a struggle. Her personal belongings were scattered, her precious slate broken on the floor. Mrs. Garcia appeared from the main house, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Cole. They came while you were gone, Sheriff Brady and 6 men. They took her to the jail." Cole's blood ran cold. The Copper Ridge jail was little more than a stone box, dark and airless. For someone like Rebecca, who relied on sight to communicate, it would be a special kind of hell. He rode hard back to town, his mind racing through possibilities. The jail was too well guarded for a direct assault, and Brady would be expecting him to try something desperate. He needed allies, people willing to stand up for justice, even if it meant opposing the sheriff. Dr. Harrison was his first stop. The physician's face darkened when Cole explained what had happened. "This is medical persecution, Doctor," Harrison said angrily. "I'll testify that Miss Stone's condition poses no threat to anyone." "It's going to take more than testimony," Cole replied grimly. "Brady's not interested in facts." Their next ally came from an unexpected source. Father Miguel, the Catholic priest who ministered to the Mexican families in town, appeared at Dr. Harrison's door just as they were planning their next move. "I heard about the arrest," Father Miguel said quietly. "This is not justice. This is fear masquerading as righteousness. How can I help?" Within hours, they had assembled a small but determined group of supporters. Mrs. Garcia rallied the Mexican community, who had faced their own share of prejudice in Copper Ridge. Several ranchers who'd had business dealings with Cole vouched for his character, and, by extension, Rebecca's. Even Mr. Miller from the general store admitted privately that he'd never seen Rebecca do anything remotely threatening. But their most surprising ally was young Tommy Wilson, whose family had initially blamed Rebecca for his infant brother's illness. Tommy had been learning to read and had overheard conversations about sign language being devil talk. "Mr. Cole," Tommy said earnestly, "I've been watching Miss Rebecca in church when she comes. She don't make scary signs, she makes pretty ones, like she's talking to God with her hands." Out of the mouths of babes, Cole thought. Tommy had seen what the adults missed. That Rebecca's signing was simply another form of prayer, another way of reaching towards something greater than herself. Meanwhile, Rebecca sat in the dark jail cell, her world reduced to touch and smell, and the faint vibrations she could feel through the stone walls. Without her slate, without the ability to see faces and read lips, she was trapped in a silence deeper than any she'd known since childhood. She wasn't alone in the jail. Brady had thrown her in with drunk Pete, a harmless vagrant who spent more time in the cell than out of it. Pete couldn't understand sign language, but he recognized distress when he saw it. "Don't you worry, miss," Pete whispered in the darkness. "Word's getting around town about how they treated you. Lots of folks ain't happy about it." Rebecca couldn't hear his words, but she felt his gentle hand patting her shoulder in comfort. Even here, in this place of despair, kindness found a way to reach her. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the next morning, with Judge Carver presiding. Cole knew Carver was a fair man, but he was also beholden to the townspeople who elected him. If public opinion remained against Rebecca, even a fair judge might be swayed. That night, Cole made a decision that would change everything. If the town wanted to see sign language, he'd give them a demonstration they'd never forget. He spent hours practicing with Mrs. Garcia, who had been learning signs from Rebecca in secret. "Are you sure about this, Doctor?" Harrison asked when Cole explained his plan. "Rebecca taught me that sign language isn't magic. It's just another way to speak the truth," Cole replied. "Tomorrow, I'm going to speak some truths this town needs to hear." The final confrontation approaches. Subscribe now to see if Cole's desperate plan can save the woman he loves from ignorance and hatred. The courthouse was packed for Rebecca's hearing, with standing room only and tensions running high. Judge Carver, a stern man with graying whiskers, called for order as Sheriff Brady presented his charges. "Your Honor, the defendant stands accused of practicing witchcraft through the use of unnatural hand gestures and of casting evil spells that have caused illness among our children." Rebecca sat in the defendant's chair, looking small and vulnerable without her slate to communicate. She could read some lips, but the rapid legal proceedings and multiple speakers made it nearly impossible to follow what was happening to her. Judge Carver studied the charges with obvious skepticism. "Sheriff Brady, these are serious accusations. What evidence do you present?" Multiple witnesses saw the defendant making strange gestures with her hands, Your Honor. Shortly afterward, children in town fell ill. The connection is obvious. "Is it, Doctor?" Harrison stood up from the gallery. "Your Honor, I request permission to present medical testimony." "Objected," Reverend Walsh called out. "This is a matter of spiritual corruption, not medicine." Judge Carver raised his hand for silence. "Doctor." "Harrison, you may speak." "For 20 minutes, Doctor." Harrison explained the medical realities of deafness, the educational value of sign language, and the complete lack of any connection between hand gestures and illness. His testimony was clear, factual, and compelling. But when he finished, Reverend Walsh rose to counter with emotional rhetoric about unnatural communications and corruption of God's divine plan. Several townspeople nodded in agreement, fear still stronger than facts in their minds. Judge Carver looked troubled. Does the defendant wish to speak in her own defense? Rebecca looked helplessly at the judge, then at Cole. Without her slate, she had no way to communicate except through the very signs that had landed her in this situation. That's when Cole stood up. "Your Honor, I request permission to translate for Miss Stone. You understand her gestures?" Judge Carver asked. "I understand her language," Cole corrected firmly. "With the court's permission, I'd like to demonstrate exactly what sign language really is." Judge Carver nodded slowly. "Proceed, Mr. Matthews." Cole walked to the center of the courtroom, where everyone could see him clearly. He looked directly at Rebecca and began to sign, speaking aloud as he did so. "Rebecca, tell them who you are. Tell them your story." Rebecca's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. Slowly, she began to sign her response, and Cole translated. "My name is Rebecca Stone. I lost my hearing and speech to scarlet fever when I was 5 years old. I learned sign language at a school in St. Louis, where I also learned to read, write, and do mathematics." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom as people realized they were witnessing a conversation, not a spell-casting session. Rebecca continued signing, and Cole translated, "I came to Copper Ridge hoping to teach school, to help children learn. When that wasn't possible, Mr. Matthews offered me honest work. I have never harmed anyone, never wished harm on anyone. My hands speak the same language as my heart, with love, not hate." Judge Carver leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Miss Stone through Mr. Matthews, can you tell us what you were signing when Mrs. Henderson saw you on the street? Rebecca's hands moved gracefully, and Cole translated. I was signing the Lord's Prayer. I had just come from church and was still praying as I walked. The courtroom erupted. Mrs. Henderson gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Even some of Rebecca's harshest critics looked shaken by this revelation. But Cole wasn't finished. He turned to address the packed courtroom directly. You want to know what sign language really is? It's this woman telling me she loves me. It's her asking God to bless this town, even after you've treated her with nothing but cruelty. It's her teaching me that courage isn't about making noise. It's about speaking truth, even when the world refuses to listen. Cole's voice grew stronger, more passionate. You're afraid of her because she's different. But I've spent months getting to know Rebecca Stone, and I can tell you she's the kindest, most generous person I've ever met. If you convict her of witchcraft for praying in sign language, then you're convicting yourselves of something far worse, willful ignorance and cruelty. Young Tommy Wilson stood up in the gallery. Judge Carver, sir. I seen Miss Rebecca in church lots of times. Her hands always look like she's talking to angels. His innocent words seemed to break some kind of spell over the courtroom. Other voices began to speak up. Mrs. Garcia talking about Rebecca's gentleness with animals, Mr. Miller admitting he'd never seen her do anything threatening. Even some of the children saying they thought her signs were pretty. Judge Carver called for order, then rendered his verdict. The charges against Miss Rebecca Stone are hereby dismissed. There is no evidence of witchcraft, only evidence of prejudice and misunderstanding. The courtroom erupted in cheers and protests, but Cole only had eyes for Rebecca. She was crying, her hands signing, "Thank you," over and over again. Cole pushed through the crowd to reach her, pulling her into his arms right there in front of everyone. It's over, he said, knowing she could read his lips. You're free. 3 months later, Cole and Rebecca were married in a simple ceremony at Father Miguel's church. Dr. Harrison officiated alongside the priest, and even Judge Carver attended to wish them well. Rebecca wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from the desert. When Father Miguel asked if she would take Cole as her husband, she signed yes with tears of joy streaming down her face, and Cole translated for the congregation. Their first dance was to music only Cole could hear, but Rebecca felt the rhythm in his heartbeat as they swayed together. She signed against his chest, and he whispered her words aloud. I love you, Cole Matthews. Thank you for hearing my heart when the world only saw my silence. Copper Ridge never became perfect, but it became better. Rebecca eventually did teach school, instructing children in both spoken and sign language. Some parents objected at first, but when their children came home excited about learning a new way to communicate, prejudice gradually gave way to curiosity. And sometimes on quiet Sunday mornings, visitors to Copper Ridge would see the unusual sight of an entire congregation signing hymns together, their hands raised not in witchcraft, but in worship, led by a woman who had taught a whole town that there are many ways to speak with God. Thank you for following Rebecca and Cole's beautiful journey from prejudice to acceptance. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring Western stories that celebrate love conquering all obstacles. Ring that notification bell for